Ready? Well, welcome to our spring sustainability seminar series. I'm Kishore Rajagopalan, Associate Director at the Illinois Sustainable Technology Center. For those of you who are new or joining us over the web, the mission of the center is to advance sustainable practices, reduce pollution, and enhance human and environmental health, with a primary focus in the industrial and manufacturing space. We are one of 5 surveys organized within the Prairie Research Institute. The Institute, through its integrated, objective research, seeks to ensure sustainable economic development, enduring environmental quality, and cultural resource preservation for the people, businesses, and governments of Illinois. The goal of this spring sustainability seminar series is to listen to various perspectives on sustainability-related issues in Illinois, such as environmental protection, energy, and so forth. We have encouraged our speakers to articulate their priorities, perceived needs, opportunities, and ongoing work to stimulate broader collaboration and to find common ground. I'm pleased to welcome today's speaker, Diane Teachick, from the Illinois Department of Natural Resources. Diane is the program director for the new Illinois Coastal Management Program with the IDNR. She leads the growth of the, she led the growth of the new program and began implementation of all aspects of it with the goal of balancing environmental, economic, and community needs. She works to align the goals of its key funders, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and the US EPA, to focus the program's efforts on top regional priorities. Prior to this position, she worked as a natural heritage biologist in central and southwest Illinois, where she focused on protection, restoration, and management of rare natural communities and species, with a focus on cave and karst management and cooperative restoration efforts. In 2001, she accepted the position of Regional Natural Heritage Administrator with the IDNR, where she managed the natural heritage field programs for Southwest, Central, and Northwest Illinois. Here she provided greater coordination for restoration efforts among these regions, with a special emphasis on hill prairie management. She has a bachelor's and a master's in zoology from Southern Illinois University in Carbondale. So before we get started, a couple of housekeeping points. Restrooms are in the hallway across the reception and through the door to my right. And in case of an emergency, please stand up and follow me, and I'll take you out to a safe location. Okay. With that, Diane, it's all yours. Thank you for being here.
Great, thank you, Kishore. And thanks all for coming to see the presentation today. I'm really excited to talk a little bit more about the Coastal Management Program, because we're a brand new program for Department of Natural Resources, and the idea of sustainability has really seeped into our consciousness within our new program, because as we started working with the various issues, the coastal issues, it just seemed like a very natural fit that we have to look at not just environmental issues, but economic and community needs as well. So just a quick overview. Because we're a new program, here's what we wanted to do first was plan what we were going to do with our new program. So there's some planning for sustainability, and I'll touch on a couple of topics there. And then actually promoting sustainability and working with various partners. And then we'll talk a little bit about our sustainability in practice through an example of Millennium Reserve, which is a governor's initiative. And lastly, just a brief wrap up on how we're integrating sustainability into our program. So the Illinois Coastal Management Program was officially approved in January of 2012. So we really are brand new. The department doesn't come up with a lot of new programs. And basically the point of this program was to support partnerships, governmental agencies, and focus resources and efforts on our coastal resources in Illinois. We've got 63 miles of coast, and we're on one of the Great Lakes. It's a really important habitat area and an area that supports almost 8 million people in the greater Chicago area. So focusing more effort, strengthening local stakeholder capacity, and continuing more focused and effective coastal management were some of our goals. So just a little bit about what a coastal program is. When I say we became a coastal management program, it means that we are part of a national coastal zone management program that is run by the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. And any coastal state is eligible to become part of the coastal program. But Illinois lagged behind pretty much all the rest of them. So for many years they tried to get a coastal program running in Illinois, and because of the bureaucratic hurdles and who knows what other kinds of hurdles, it didn't happen. Well, it finally did, and so what this does, it makes us eligible for about $2 million a year in federal funding to help support our program. So that's part of it, that we're officially part of this coastal zone management program. But because the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative has also came up around the same time, there was a strong interest for IDNR to play a greater role in the Great Lakes. And so we're also getting some additional funding from US EPA through Great Lakes Restoration Initiative to basically support development of the coastal program and to focus more efforts on Lake Michigan, and particularly the areas of concern, which we've only got one of, and I'll talk a little bit about that later, and also the lake-wide action and management plans. These are plans that EPA develops to focus efforts and to identify actions and managements that need to be taken to preserve and protect the integrity of the lakes. And then lastly, IDNR, as part of this sort of partnership, we're putting in our own funds to support these programs and to act as match for those programs. And we're really putting more effort and more resources behind our program up in northeastern Illinois. So that's really a nice change. Oftentimes the Department of Natural Resources is considered sort of a downstate agency, and this was a way for us to focus more of our efforts in the Chicago area and on the resources that are up there. So because I'm giving a sustainability seminar, I'm going to tell you how we define sustainability. One of the things that is interesting about our program is that because we get money from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, they're actually under the Department of Commerce, not just resources. So that gives us additional broader focus than maybe what you would think of traditionally within Department of Natural Resources. So some of the things that we do consider is economic development, sustainable development, the transportation systems that are associated with the coastal area. So that kind of gave us a step into this broader view of sustainability. And then also with the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative, part of their focus has been on these areas of concern, which were places that were more or less toxic hotspots, legacy areas of pollution. And by cleaning those areas up and putting more of a focus there, it really does benefit these communities, industries, and the natural environment as well. So the combination of those funding sources really made us think more broadly about what this coastal program should be. And so, what we're trying to get at here is that we're trying to find that sweet spot of sustainability, looking at how we can both consider and try to balance environmental health, economic strength, and community vitality, which is, more or less the image here, thanks to University of Michigan, whoever. I got this from Google. So that's how we're defining it. So just to tell you a little bit about our region, what's defined as the coastal zone for Illinois. This is our boundary, and it is pretty darn narrow and incredibly narrow in some places. It's a bit of an odd boundary because of the changes in the direction of water and how it flows in the Chicago area, the reversal of the river systems taking water away from the lake instead of going into it, change the watershed so that now just a tiny amount of watershed is left along the lake in some areas, at least under normal rain conditions. Under tremendous storms, it changes a little bit. So it's kind of a temporal boundary in a way. So I just wanted to mention that there's a lot of variety in our coast as well. And in a way, it reflects this idea of sustainability and why we need to address it with the definition that we did. Up at the top there, you can see some wonderful habitats. That's coastal habitat up at Illinois Beach State Park. It's got a tremendous number of endangered and threatened species, some found nowhere else in the state. We've also got rare community types that are there. And so the habitats are really critical. The coastline is also a really important bird migration route. I can't even imagine the number of birds that come through. Someone probably has an estimate of that, but it truly, birds get funneled through this area along our lake shore, going both north and south during the migration seasons. So from that perspective, we need to protect the environmental aspects of our coast and take those into consideration. And that's a natural, for me, my background is with our Division of Natural Heritage, where we really focused on, natural resource communities, habitats, and rare and endangered species. But in addition to that, and we've also got these wonderful ravine areas that are down along the coast just a little bit further south, again, hosting some really unique plants and animals. But then as we get down here, we start getting into the population center here. We're getting to a coastline that has been tremendously modified. And it's supporting all the industries that we've got there. It's supporting this 8 million people in the metropolitan area. It is built to support that kind of population. And so we feel like as part of our program, we have to consider that impact and the importance of that built environment and the needs of the people in the communities there. And then lastly, right here, this is the area down in Lake Calumet. This area has supported some of the heaviest of heavy industries, steel manufacturing in the past, and a lot of these industries have moved out of the area, but they've left a permanent mark on the land. They've influenced it for the long term, and we need to accept what has happened. We need to honor the fact that that this is what helped build Chicago, but we can also help to rehabilitate those areas and help better connect people to the natural areas that are still there. And there are some really wonderful natural areas. There we go. So I got a new program on my hands. What am I going to do? How do I get started with this? We have a lot of priorities. There are lots of groups doing lots of things outside. How should we allocate our staff time? How do we allocate our funding? These were all questions that came up starting the program. How do we prioritize? given a limited number of staff and a limited amount of money. This is just an idea of what our coastal management program priorities were as set out in our program document. So as I was mentioning before, we've got the natural habitats, of course, but we've also got sustainable development and economic development. We need to be cognizant of climate change and adaptation to that. Access and recreation is an important component of what we do. There are a lot of different priorities. So how do we prioritize among those priorities? So I was lucky enough to walk into a grant that someone had already gotten to develop the Illinois Lake Michigan Implementation Plan. And basically the idea of this was to help us guide the program and set the direction and set the priorities by reaching out to stakeholders to understand what's important to them as well. We also wanted to engage people. We're a new program. We want to raise people's awareness of the program, and we want to raise their awareness of the resources that we have that are just incredibly valuable along Illinois' coast. And lastly, we wanted to create like a template so that every several years we could go back to the drawing board and look at what we're doing, make sure it's still in line with the stakeholder needs, with the resource needs, and with the program direction. So it allows us to recalibrate what we're doing. So this is kind of complicated, but I just want to go through it really briefly. And initially what we did, I told you we're getting money from two major sources, from the NOAA funding for the coastal program and U.S. EPA funding through Great Lakes Restoration Initiative. We basically took the priorities that NOAA has, and we were looking at those, identified those, and also identified the goals of the Great Lakes Restoration Initiative and the grant that we received through them and what their goals are. Using those two, we tried to combine those, and then we went out to work with various experts, stakeholders, to refine those ideas and kind of tie them together into one more complete package of what I'm referring to as potential objectives. And we used a couple of interesting tools along with that. This wiki is actually the US EPA's Watershed Wiki site, which allows people to type in. It's a user-driven tool for people to add information about their watersheds. So we used information that we got from the wiki. We also sent out a survey to our various stakeholders, and then we looked at a bunch of previous plans to see where the intersections were of what's going on in the Great Lakes, what people have already thought about that need to be priorities for the Great Lakes. And we came up with those potential objectives. And so with that, we then put that through another process that was using this thing called MindMixer. And it is an online website, basically, that is sort of like a town hall, online town hall program. And basically it allows people to come to it. It's a very low barrier to entry, and they can vote on different topics. It's very accessible for people that the wiki was actually kind of challenging to use, even for some of my staff. And so for this, it was a much lower barrier to entry, easy to use, and a very nice tool to reach out to a very wide audience. And so we took all our potential objectives and put them through there, and then we came up with priorities for the whole coast in general, and then for the different areas, because as I mentioned before, we've got some very different things going on throughout our 63-mile coast, from the North Shore all the way to the county map. So we had priorities that were regionally determined. So basically we ended up with this Illinois Lake Implementation Plan, which we just finished up, and I put some copies of it's more or less the executive summary from that out on the table, so you're welcome to take one of those. What this basically gives us now is a blueprint for us to go out and focus on the things that people have told us are important to them. And in addition to that, we actually found that some things that are really interesting for stakeholders and that are a high priority for stakeholders they were all very important, but there were other things that maybe weren't as flashy or as well known or that stakeholders were particularly aware of that we felt were very important. So we actually came up with an additional list of priorities based on the grants that we receive and what we have to do, mandatory for those, but also what we've seen and what we've experienced as far as what other priorities are out there that, like I said, may just be a little less flashy or less well known. Sediment management would be one of those things. So that gave us the plan, and I'm just going to run through this really quick. These were the top priorities for throughout the entire coast, and we were amazed, but habitat restoration came out on top. Green infrastructure is also an important priority, and invasive species. So we were actually really glad to hear that because it reinforces what some of the things that we were already wanting to do. For the North Shore, we were interested that they really had a strong focus on recreation and connecting various trails, waterways, and beaches. So that was a little bit unexpected, but fits in well with what we're doing. And then in the South, in Calumet, one of the things that was very important was connecting and improving the hydrology, which has been drastically changed in the past. And then also supporting brownfield redevelopment. So that just gives you a general idea of what some of those priorities were for the various areas. So what can we do with this information, and how do I bring that those goals and our program out to the communities and raise people's awareness and provide them with support for some of these goals? Well, so what we've been doing is going out now with my nice documents so I can show them, hey, this is our program. We're focusing a little bit on restoration, so we're doing community assistance with that. And basically, we're trying to get involved with projects and with communities where we can actually bring together some resources and maybe get things over the hump. Like, for instance, the Lake Michigan Water Trail, people have been working on this for a while. We're trying to bring a little bit of extra effort, maybe a little bit of funding to that so that we can push it forward and then disseminate that so that the lakeshore communities can become part of this Lake Michigan Water Trail. And we'd also like to expand trails more, and we're working with various communities to connect so that they can put their goals together among those communities, which oftentimes doesn't happen. But as the Coastal Management Program, I can help convene those types of meetings so that we can move things forward on the recreation front, while at the same time putting it in the context of, hey, we have these great coastal resources, and I'm with the Department of Natural Resources, and we want to make sure and do this in a way that's compatible with the resources that are here, and as a way to generate economic development in your areas. So that's one way we're doing community assistance. Another way, this is climate adaptation. And I have to admit, at this point, we have not done much with this, but it is high on the priority list for work with the coastal communities. NOAA has a lot of tools and data that can help support planning in various coastal communities, and those are some of the communities that are at very high risk for changes because of climate change. And so what we hope to do, and just haven't done yet, is work with these communities and talk to them about how they can better, how they can make their communities more resilient to the changes that we know are coming. And so through that, we're hoping that that in itself is going to help for their economic development, that they're going to make some wiser choices with where they put their development and how they develop. We're going to make maybe, we're going to counsel on habitat. Why is this important? How can we protect this? Why is it important? And then just making communities aware of the new hazards that they can be confronted with now that climate change is occurring. Oh, there we go. Yes, historically low water levels and high-intensity storms, which we have been experiencing. Those are great examples for us to give when we go to coastal communities to let them know, hey, this is something we really need to prepare for because, hey, remember 2 years ago when that giant storm came and, knocked down all these things or took away half our beach at Illinois Beach State Park. So people are starting to see this, and what we're hoping is to bring additional science, data, and possibly solutions to these communities to help them become more resilient. There we go. And then sustainable coastal planning. In general, for communities, we want to be able to go out and help coordinate among these coastal communities for these resources that are shared all throughout the coast. We want to be able to promote some great coastal programming. How do we get people more aware of the resources that we have so that they can really care about them? We have people that live in the city who have never been to the lake, who don't really realize that we have a coast. They can't care about any of these things without knowing about it, without having a connection to that. And so part of our program, through coastal planning, is bringing some of that education and outreach to these communities. And so for promoting coastal sustainability and actually putting a little bit of money where our mouth is, we developed a grant program. And basically it took a while for us to get up and running. It's a complicated process, but after about 1.5 years, we were able to get our first request for proposals out, and that was last summer, and we announced projects in the fall of last year. We were giving out projects anywhere from $30,000 to $100,000. And we really, when we were coming up with both the ranking criteria and evaluation, we were considering, okay, how does this fit with the environmental concerns? How does it fit with the economics, the communities that are out there, and how does it connect people to the coastal areas? And so that really did seep into our thinking about how we wanted to implement this grant program. So here's one example of one of the projects that we funded. This was a project from the League of Women Voters. And basically it's a public information campaign on stormwater. And they did a really wonderful job convening quite a few people in the coastal area before they even had the grant. I spoke at one of their seminars, and they had probably 100 people, which, gosh, I never speak in front of that many people. And so it was really impressive that they were able to get that together. And I talked about our grant program, and through that seminar, they came back to us and asked for a grant to do this and kind of roll it out further to more communities. And so the issues with stormwater, many of you are probably aware, but I mean it's an economic issue, it's a community issue, and it's an environmental issue. And so by focusing some of our efforts on this and the education associated with this, we felt like that was a good fit for sustainability. And then the Coastal Ambassadors Program, this was through the Chicago Park District, and again, this was actually a way to connect people in Chicago to this coastal area and make them more aware of it. Take them out for recreational activities. teach them about the natural resources that we have there and why the lake is important. It's a way to get people out and a way to get people connected, and that's good for people. It's very healthy to get outside, to be aware of what the environment is. It's been shown that it is just very good for our mental health. And so connecting people and taking them away from maybe all the asphalt and the trash cans and all the city streets that, that we live in all the time is really an important thing, and we thought that that would be a good fit for our program as well. And then a little bit back to green infrastructure and non-point source pollution. This was another thing that we really felt was a good fit for sustainability and for our program. And basically green infrastructure, it uses vegetation, soils, natural processes to manage stormwater and to create healthier environments. And this just talks a little bit about what green infrastructure is. My guess is a lot of you probably know what it is, but it can be looked at from a couple of different scales, and we definitely, there's been confusion about the term green infrastructure because some people think of it as interconnected set of preserves and reserves on a large scale, which does act as stormwater green infrastructure, but at the scale of a neighborhood, it could just be a rain garden or a small, plot of native plants, using permeable pavers, things like that, that address more specific, localized stormwater needs. And then we've got some of the examples of green infrastructure there. So that's a little bit about green infrastructure. When we started seeing what this was and the programs that are out there for green infrastructure, we felt like this would be a really good fit for our program. And again, a good fit as far as sustainability goes. And this, just shows that flooding is a serious economic impact. It also, any storm runoff is an issue for Lake Michigan or for the river systems. That's where we get a lot of our pollution. Some of the worst pollution is that stormwater runoff. And so from an environmental perspective, we would like to detain that water or retain that water, let that filter down so that it can filter out some of the contaminants in it. And then lastly, stormwater and flooding affects people. It's a community thing. When people get flooded, when they can't get to their homes, they can't get to work, it ruins their possessions. So it's a community issue too. So we really felt that the stormwater issue hit all the key sustainability criteria that we were looking for, and was a very good fit for our program. Because as part of NOAA's coastal zone management program, we have to develop a non-point source pollution program. So we're actually in the process of doing that right now. And what we're trying to do with that, we need to work closely with IEPA, who also already has a non-point source pollution program, and also with the US EPA, so that we can find what the best fit is. How do we craft a program that's going to cover our coastal zone that is meaningful within the budget that we have, within the ability that we have, and that can add value to what's the programs that are already out there. So ultimately, I mean, we want to reduce and manage the stormwater that reaches Lake Michigan. We've got grants available to be able to do that, and we want to make sure and connect with other programs that are already doing this sort of activity so that we're not duplicating efforts. That was something that was really important to us, because we knew that there were other non-point source pollution programs out there. In our case, in the coastal zone, stormwater is probably the biggest issue that we're going to have. So that's going to be the main challenge. And what we're really trying to do, we put a panel together of different advisors from agencies that know quite a bit about stormwater management, non-point source pollution, runoff, those sorts of things, and we're trying to find what is our best role and how can we add value to the system that's already here and actually make a difference. And part of that would certainly be educational materials, but we're hoping that there are going to be some other really valuable things that we can do. And one of the valuable things that we're actually already doing is promoting green infrastructure, and we've already received a grant, and we're starting to put some projects into the implementation phase down in the Calumet region. It was a pilot project through US EPA, and we targeted 7 different communities, and I believe it was for about $300,000, and so we're able to get people working on designing structures, finding good locations for green infrastructure so that it would make a difference on localized flooding. Okay, let me just go back. And so this is sort of putting sustainability into practice. The Millennium Reserve initiative it was a governor's initiative and a partnership of nearly 100 public agencies, private businesses, nonprofit organizations, all working together and basically with the sustainability goals to stimulate economic growth in the Calumet region, to restore and enhance its natural ecosystems, and also to improve the quality of life in that area. The geographic area stretches from kind of the south part of downtown all down along the Indiana border, and it goes out just a little past Blue Island in the Southlands, and it encompasses the region known as the Calumet, and also the South Shore area of the lakefront. It includes a lot of neighborhoods on the south side and about 36 different south suburban communities. So it's a large area, and there's a map showing the region and showing some of the green space within it. So even though I talked a little bit earlier about this being an area that was affected by these industries in the past, it is still an area of ecological significance. There are a number of endangered and threatened species that are in this area, a number of very rare, globally imperiled habitat types in the area, and it's also part of this this bird migration corridor that goes along the lakefront. And so it's critical stopover habitat for all kinds of birds. See, you know, this area is very culturally rich too, and sadly, because I talked a little bit too long earlier, I'm going to have to flip through some of these a little more quickly. But this area has a long history of industrial development and the legacy associated with that, and it really did help build this area. In addition, because of those industries, it brought in so many different kinds of people from all over the world, all kinds of different cultures, habits, all kinds of things, and it's a very, very diverse area, and one that was built on these strong industries of the past. Let's see, and so, you know, considering that, you know, we wanted to come up with this new model for how we can approach this. Basically, Department of Natural Resources has been involved in the Calumet area for many years, and though progress has certainly been made, and a lot of great research was done, and a lot of great restoration was done, it still has a lot of issues. And so because of those barriers, we realize that if we don't consider the economy in this area and the communities as well as the environment and try to address all three and try to stimulate all three of these things, that we really will not be able to achieve the environmental goals that might have been our original goal. And so we really started looking at this much more broadly, and this is an unusual thing for the Department of Natural Resources. We usually focus on just the resources. And that's where the partnership part really comes in handy, because we are not economic development specialists. We are not community development specialists. We do work on natural resources, though. And so through this partnership, we were able to bring people to the table so that we've got a meeting of the minds that both the environment, the economy, and the communities have to live together in the same space, and that we can do this in a way that is sustainable. And it's actually brought some non-traditional partners to this effort, which is really a valuable thing. So just mention shared leadership. The governor this is one of the governor's, prime initiatives in that area, and he designated a steering committee of about 24 different people representing industries, representing state agencies, community organizations, environmental organizations, foundations. But I'll just reiterate, industry was brought into the fold at the beginning, and we have people like ArcelorMittal, the steelmaker. They're part of our steering committee. CSX Railroads, part of our steering committee, along with Southeast Environmental Task Force, a small community organization that fights for environmental issues in that area. So the shared leadership is really important for making sure that we are indeed trying to find that balance of environment, economy, and the communities. And so I'll just go through a couple of quick examples of projects. We received a grant to help fund this Green Core initiative. Basically, this was something that was developed by the City of Chicago. Now it's actually with the Chicago Department of Transportation. But they came up with a training program to hire on people with barriers to employment, train them thoroughly in not just environmental and restoration skills, but also like daily working skills and, training, just general training, being ready for the workforce. These were people that maybe didn't have jobs in the past or had previously been in prison. And so through this program, they were able to take a crew of people, put them through a training course, pretty rigorous, probably almost half the year, and then they brought them out to do restoration on a lot of these natural areas. Also did some of the home insulating that was all the rage not too long ago. And so through this program, we were able to get people hired, get people trained, and get ecological restoration done on some of the highest quality areas in the Calumet. And then this is this just gives an example of some of the trail projects. We've been putting some focus behind this because trails bring people in. Trails bring people together. They connect neighborhoods. They connect people to different places, their jobs. They bring in tourists so that people can come down to the area. So the Department of Natural Resources and other state agencies have been putting more effort and funding behind the trail, various trail segments in the Southlands, particularly the CalSag Trail. This was one of great importance that has been on the radar screen for a number of years now, and it was hard to get all the different communities coordinated to be able to put this together. But by doing this and by putting that together, we're creating an amenity and a destination for people to go, and something that the communities can have as they're part of this larger picture and connecting people to their communities. And then this is Mighty Acorns. This is another example of how we're trying to reach out and train kids and introduce kids to the outdoors so that they're aware of some of the great places that are nearby. The Mighty Acorns is focusing in on some of the South Side schools, South suburban schools, and basically bringing kids out 3 times a year to start getting a connection to nature, to learn a little bit about what's out there, what's in their neighborhoods, why is this important to us. And in fact, our people were out just about a week or so ago with the Mighty Acorns crew, and they found a tiger salamander at William Powers State Park, and oh my God, everyone went crazy. It's been all the talk of William Powers. It was like up on YouTube. That was like a definitive experience for some kids who maybe have never been out to that park before. And so that's a reason for them to come back and say, wow, we saw the salamander out there, or we saw these turtles out here, and there's some really great things out there. So that's really important to us as well. And this last one, this is the Tillman Maritime Academy. This particular place is really a great project. Prologue is an alternative school that was developed for basically for job training, service learning for low-income at-risk, primarily African-American youth. And basically their idea was, there's this old marina here. We want to come in, we want to transform this marina, allow students, this is an alternative school, allow these students to come in, work in this marina, help us get it back in shape, and in the meantime be teaching them about environmental issues, be teaching them real work, real job skills, things that they can take elsewhere as well. And so this is a great idea, and we're hoping that with some of the seed money through our grant program that we can actually help them get this off the ground. And so I will wrap it up with this, and we still have a little bit of time. Just a little bit about integrating sustainability. As I've been doing this job, I have just found that when I use this approach of considering and trying to balance out environmental needs with economic needs, with the community needs, it results in better outcomes. It just does. And part of it, I think, is just the fact of that type of approach that brings down some of the resistance that you get traditionally if you just come in and talk about environmental issues, talk about natural resource issues. My whole background is biology and natural resource issues and protection and management of those things. But honestly, the environmental movement has really, it's done wonderful things, but just mentioning environment sometimes raises people's ire. It gets them mad. It gets their hackles up. And you get people digging in their heels about the way that, what they do or do not want to do. And by using this approach, by integrating the environmental, economic, and community values, I think we're able to reach a broader sector. We're able to talk a little more rationally and hear various people's concerns. And by doing that, we're also bringing new partners to the table. Partners that you would not normally imagine, some of the industries that, oh, well, now I understand what you're trying to do. And so they're going to take a little more consideration about their environmental impacts. When we're respecting the fact that, hey, we actually do need this industry, how can we find the right spot in between where we're preserving the environment, where we're preserving the industries and economy and the communities in the area? So that's what we're looking for, and I hope that our coastal management program is going to continue and be successful in that, and hopefully we're going to get out to more communities and be able to work with them with that approach and find ways that are really going to work for these communities and make them appreciate more the natural resources that they have. And so with that, I'll say we do have a website. If you want to see a little bit more about our program, we will be putting our Illinois Lake Michigan implementation plan up on the website soon. We just recently got the final version. So that's going to be up there, and please feel free to contact me, and I'm happy to take any questions. Yes, sir.
Do you have any predictions on the level of Lake Michigan, the water level over this year?
Oh boy. Many people say hi. Many people say no. Oh yes, sorry about that. The question was, do I have any prediction on the water levels in Lake Michigan? And my response, I really have heard it going both ways. Lower water levels or higher water levels. I think that the jury is out. My personal thought is that we're going to have more dramatic fluctuations one way or another, and that we might end up with a little bit of both. And so again, that's it. You know, it's this idea of trying to build resilience so that you can weather those types of changes, whether it's high or whether it's low. Yes, sir.
Kind of carrying on that question, does your program integrate the concept of flooding, or how do you deal with the issue of flooding on the coast? Is that part of your vision or program?
So the question is, how do we integrate the issue of flooding along the coast? That actually is part of what we would consider, and certainly part of what would be my approach with communities when we talk about coastal planning. And as I mentioned, we are a new program, so we have not been going out and doing a lot of community assistance yet on like climate change adaptation and flooding. But that would be part of what we would like to bring to the table. Our connection with NOAA gives us a lot of their science tools and prediction tools and models that can really help determine what are the areas that are going to flood, which ones aren't, which ones might be at risk. And so what we hope to do through our outreach programs is reach those communities with those types of tools and help them work through their planning process so that they can take that into consideration. But certainly we want to make sure they're aware of these things and make those tools available to them as well. Yes, sir?
I noticed your map showed the coastal zone as being extremely narrow.
Yes.
But historically, if I recall right, the drainage area to Lake Michigan was much wider.
Yes.
So the geology, the plants, and all the ecological milieu up there extends far more to the west. Has there been any thought to having the coastal zone boundary match the geology and what was there instead of just the artificial drainage change that was made in the early 1900s?
The question is, have we considered using a boundary for the coastal zone that reflects the biology and geology, considering that the watershed used to be much wider than it is now? I would love to see that in general, because we know things don't stop at that coastal boundary. But you also have to define things, and that was done before I came on board with the program, and probably done for some specific reasons, and exactly where the drainage is. That said, we really do recognize that the coastal area goes much farther in, and that it is a wider zone. And we do have some flexibility with the funding that we get through the US EPA, because that is the Lake Michigan program, and they actually do consider a wider area as for the watershed of Lake Michigan, just the broader region. And so, yeah, in an ideal world, we would have a wider coastal zone, but unfortunately, that's not the case. But we like to think about it, and what, in a way, what I hope to do as time goes on is, through working with the department, bring more of a focus on that wider area as well, and bring more resources, even if it's not NOAA resources and it's not within our coastal zone boundary. We can still address things as the Department of Natural Resources. Yes, sir.
Sometime back, DNR had focus looking at longshore sediment transport and coastal erosion. Are those, you planning to continue those sorts of studies and programs?
Yeah. The question is, DNR used to do longshore coastal erosion studies and research, and does the coastal program plan on continuing that? In fact, I spent a good bit of time in the last few weeks talking about that, and that is something that we definitely want to do. There are serious issues with erosion and accretion, and too much sand, not enough sand, sand moving where we don't want it to go. And in fact, that's a really good example of one of the things that did not come through the Illinois Lake Michigan Implementation Plan, that people didn't identify sand management or sediment management as a high priority, but as a program, it is. That definitely is a high priority for us. So we are actually working with the Corps and a few other entities to try to do some studies along the shoreline. We had hoped in the past we had a coastal geologist at the survey, and he's no longer with the department. And so unfortunately we don't have somebody right at hand to do that, but we've been talking with our other staff in the Office of Water Resources, and we really feel it's time to look at that again and look at the erosion and the sedimentation and the sediment budget for the area. All right, any other questions?
I have one.
Yes.
So you talked about the Millennium Reserve Program.
Yes.
Is that funded through NOAA and US EPA, or is it from the state?
So it is, we got the ball rolling with our NOAA funding and with the US EPA funding. So kind of a combination of both. It was a governor's initiative that came through DNR and then ended up with our program. So we helped move that forward. But it truly is a broad partnership. And so all these various partners are doing activities that support Millennium Reserve. So we are not the only funding entity for that, but certainly we're actually bringing some additional state dollars to the table as well, just through IDNR, other parts of IDNR. But certainly, you know, we're spending some of our staff time, so that would be NOAA and EPA funded. But then for some of the bigger projects and more, you know, really more ambitious things, we're going to need other funding sources because we just don't have enough to do some of the things that are out there. But a couple of examples I'll give real quick. The things that align with our NOAA priorities and our EPA priorities, we certainly can fund. And so there are several really important wetlands right near Lake Calumet. It's Big Marsh and Hegwish Marsh. And we are giving the Chicago Park District a grant to do some environmental planning for that, so that they can identify what needs to be done, so they can take the next steps. They were sort of held up because they didn't have any planning funds to use, and so they needed to figure out what the first steps were. So we gave them a grant for, I want to say, around $200,000.
But the workforce training component of that program.
Yes.
Would that actually fit in with your?
That's a bit more of a stretch, and that's where we're looking to other partners as well. We have, as part of Millennium Reserve, a state agency task force that was also designated at the same time that the steering committee was designated, and it includes our department, Department of Natural Resources, Department of Transportation, Department of Community and Economic Opportunity, IHPA, Historic Preservation Agency, and no, there's one more. I can't think of it. Oh, IEPA, of course. And so we are working with them also on what resources they can bring to the table. And so in the case of workforce development, we're thinking that Department of Commerce and Economic Opportunity is the way to go. And so they've actually stepped up, and they're having some conversations now on that. In kind of a sideways way, the workforce development, we funded a little bit of it through the green infrastructure grant we got for the Calumet. It included that component. Again, we were trying to build that in. It's like, okay, how do we get environment, economy, and communities all in there? So the workforce development component brought into the green infrastructure development helped us to make that connection.
Are there any questions?